Not every base building game nails the formula. For every classic city builder or survival sim, there are a few that left players frustrated, disappointed, or downright angry. Today we're looking at the top 5 worst base building games. Titles that promised big but failed to deliver. Project Highrise 2016. Project Highrise set out to be the modern successor to SimTower, letting players design and manage skyscrapers from the ground up. On paper, it had all the right ingredients: offices, apartments, restaurants, and utilities that needed to be balanced to keep tenants happy. But in practice, the game fell flat for many fans of the genre. The problem wasn't that it was broken, but that it was bland. Base building lacked depth, with limited variety in visuals and layouts, making towers feel repetitive after only a few playthroughs. The management systems were shallow, often boiling down to balancing the same few resources, and once you learned the patterns, there was little challenge left. What could have been a vibrant city building sim instead felt like watching paint dry in a tall box. Available on PC, macOS, iOS, and Android, Project Highrise isn't unplayable, but for many, it's a forgettable and uninspired attempt at vertical base building. Aven Colony 2017. Aven Colony promised a futuristic city building experience on an alien planet, but many players found it shallow and repetitive compared to other base builders. While the visuals were solid and the idea of managing colonies on a hostile world was exciting, the gameplay loop quickly became predictable. Missions often boiled down to resource juggling and waiting, with little depth or variety to keep players engaged long term. The base building mechanics also felt limited. Structures lacked flexibility, and the management systems didn't deliver the complexity that survival or strategy fans expected. For a game set on an alien planet, it rarely took risks or offered the kind of creativity you'd hope for. Available on PC, PS4, and Xbox One, Aven Colony isn't unplayable, but it's often cited as a forgettable and underwhelming entry in the city base building genre. Spacebase DF-9. Spacebase DF-9 sounded like a dream for sci-fi fans. A base building game where you manage your own space station, recruit crew, and expand modules across the galaxy. But instead of becoming the next big space sim, it quickly became infamous for being abandoned in an unfinished state. The core idea was solid: build living quarters, research labs, defenses, and keep your crew alive against threats. But in practice, the AI was broken, base building tools were clunky, and the gameplay loop grew repetitive within hours. Many features teased during development never made it into the final release, leaving players with a shallow shell of what could have been something special. Released on PC, Steam, Spacebase DF-9 is remembered less as a survival builder and more as a cautionary tale, proof that a great concept can still fall apart without proper execution. DwarfHeim 2020. DwarfHeim tried to stand out as a co-op RTS with base building at its core, but it quickly collapsed under poor execution. Players could split roles, one focusing on mining, another on defense, and another on building. But instead of feeling fresh, it felt disjointed and unbalanced. The base building was shallow, with limited options and repetitive tasks. Bugs and technical issues plagued the experience, and the game struggled to keep an active player base. Within a short time, the servers went quiet, and eventually the developers declared bankruptcy. Available on PC, Steam, DwarfHeim is remembered as an ambitious idea that failed to deliver, making it one of the most disappointing base building flops in recent memory. StarForge 2014. StarForge promised a massive sandbox world with survival, crafting, and base building that could rival the best. What players got was a broken, incomplete mess. Development was rocky from the start, with bugs, performance issues, and features that never worked as intended. Base building felt awkward, with clumsy physics that made structures collapse or glitch constantly. Instead of the freedom and creativity it promised, the game became an exercise in frustration. To make things worse, the developers abandoned the project, pulling it from sale entirely and leaving buyers with an unfinished product. Released on PC, Steam, StarForge stands as one of the most infamous failures in the base building genre, proof that hype without polish leads to disaster. SimCity 2013. When SimCity 2013 was announced, fans were ready for the glorious return of one of the most iconic city building franchises ever. Instead, it became one of the biggest disappointments in gaming history. The core idea was there: create bustling cities, manage citizens, and balance resources, but the execution was a disaster. At launch, the game forced players to be always online, even in single player, and EA's servers couldn't handle the load. Players were locked out of the game for days. When they did finally get in, in, they found tiny city plots that made building feel cramped and restrictive. The AI was broken, traffic systems didn't work properly, and base building creativity was stifled by endless bugs. Available on PC, SimCity 2013 is remembered less as a city builder and more as a cautionary tale. It's a prime example of how poor design choices and technical issues can sink even the most legendary franchise. Towns 2012. Towns began as an ambitious indie project that blended city building with dungeon management. On paper, it sounded exciting. You'd construct a thriving village while also digging beneath the surface to create dungeons, attracting heroes to fight monsters and earn rewards. Unfortunately, the execution fell apart quickly. The biggest issue was the AI. Villagers constantly ignored commands, wandered aimlessly, or got stuck in unfinished tasks, making even basic construction frustrating. The interface was clumsy, the learning curve steep, and the game lacked polish in almost every area. Updates were slow, and eventually the developers abandoned the project altogether, leaving players with a broken, incomplete experience. Available on PC, Steam Early Access, Towns is remembered as one of the most notorious failures in early access history. It had potential, but poor management and unfinished systems left players feeling betrayed, making it one of the worst base building disappointments ever released. Urban Empire 2017. Urban Empire tried to stand out by mixing city building with political simulation, but the result was a game that pleased neither side. Instead of focusing on creative base building and city design, most of the gameplay centered on endless council meetings and voting sessions. You'd propose policies, debate with rival parties, and pass laws, but when it came to actually building your city, the options felt limited and shallow. The base building mechanics lacked depth, with tiny maps and repetitive layouts. Infrastructure systems were basic, and the political layer quickly turned tedious rather than engaging. Players expecting a blend of cities, skylines, and civilization instead found themselves bogged down in paperwork and waiting for votes to pass. Available on PC, Steam, Urban Empire is often remembered as a missed opportunity, a game with a strong concept that buried its potential under monotony and shallow systems, earning its spot among the most disappointing city builders. Godus 2013 Early Access. Godus was marketed as the return of legendary designer Peter Molyneux, promising players the chance to act as gods, shaping landscapes, guiding followers, and building civilizations from scratch. The hype was huge, but what followed was one of the most infamous disappointments in the base building genre. Instead of deep mechanics, players got shallow, repetitive gameplay. Most of the time was spent clicking endlessly to sculpt land or collect resources, with little meaningful progression. Base building felt limited, with few options to create unique settlements or manage complex systems. To make things worse, the game leaned heavily into grindy mechanics and microtransactions, frustrating players who backed it with high expectations. Though it launched on PC and mobile, development slowed to a crawl, and promised features never materialized. Godus is remembered today as a cautionary tale, proof that big promises and famous names don't guarantee a good game. Stronghold 3, 2011. The Stronghold series was once a beloved name in castle building strategy, but Stronghold 3 nearly destroyed its legacy. Fans expected a return to medieval glory, expansive castles, epic sieges, and complex base management. Instead, they got one of the buggiest and most poorly designed city builders ever released. At launch, the game was riddled with technical issues. Pathfinding was broken, making villagers and soldiers wander aimlessly or ignore commands. Base building was clunky, with limited options compared to previous entries, and the economy system felt shallow and unbalanced. Even the visuals, which should have been an upgrade, were bland and lifeless. Worse yet, many features promised before release were missing entirely. Players hoping for a grand medieval sim were left with frustration and disappointment. Released on PC, Stronghold 3 is remembered as one of the most infamous flops in base building history, a game that showed how even strong franchises can crumble without polish. And that's our list of the 5 worst base building games. Each of these flops showed how even great ideas or big franchises can fall apart without polish. Did you play any of them, or do you have another base building fail in mind? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more gaming countdowns.